Harris Tweed. Now, I love Harris Tweed. Well, the people on the island up there are adorable people. They made me very welcome both times I visited. I really like what I like to call real Harris Tweed, when it was entirely made on the island without imported yarn and dyes and that sort of thing, when it was still made on wooden looms. This would have been made mid-60s, and I always wanted one of these bright houndstooth check ones. I had one which was just cream and green and stupidly sold it. I came into this one a few weeks ago. It's in perfect condition, but it's not the perfect cut. It's got a single vent. Now a lot of these jackets were double vent, but this has got a single deep vent. So it's going to make a good project. I'm going to change this to my own cut, my own block, which is a slight modification of the Lambo block. Now these lapels are just a bit too wide for a 3-button jacket. I've already started to unpick them here. So I'm going to make this lapel a bit like that. I've just got all to this. I may investigate putting a velvet collar on there, and I may play around with putting some patches on the sleeves. I've got a big roll of Alcantara. I may just play around a little bit. What I'm aiming at is a lapel like this. Now this is a Burton Harris Tweed from probably early 60s. I'm going to take the buttons off this and take these slightly faked up buttons. These are real leather. This is maybe a plastic one, but these are the real thing from the right period. At some point, maybe 1963, they stopped producing these beautiful old football buttons. Now, here's another one from Dunn. Hello. Again, this is old Harris Tweed, but typically it's got the double vent. Never been really keen on that, and the vents are a little bit shallow for me, but watch this space. This is going to resemble one of my own jackets. It's 3-button, it will have nicer buttons, maybe an Alcantara patch on the shoulder, and this is going to be narrower here. Possibly, might be a little bit overkill if I put a velvet collar on it, but watch this space. This is going on. Very often get excited about things, but sometimes you find something that's already been around for a long time and just haven't noticed it. Now, my technique for repairing little bits of damage and little bits of wear on these old Harris Tweed jackets, which must be preserved because you're never going to get this old quality Harris Tweed ever again, normally to open up the sleeve or open up the bottom lining and steal some threads from the inside so you're darning with the same colour thread. And it's easy to make a quite good job of darning a loose weave houndstooth check like this but I've recently found something, and I was buying, I don't know, some fusing tape or something, a little haberdashery store, and I noticed this stuff. Now the brand is Trimmits, like other brands available. Now it's cotton, but it's sort of fluffy cotton and looks just like Harris Tweed yarn, and it comes in every colour. This particular one, I found some that's got several colours in the same little bunch, and so I'll just pick out one of these greys here, and it's exactly the same colour as this coat. So you see, the brilliant thing about this, instead of having to use a massive great big darning needle, now with a darning needle you can't go in between threads to get a really good purchase on it, but you can use a regular cotton needle with a bigger eye. Now the advantage of using a cotton needle is you can actually get in between threads, so it gives you a really good sort of purchase. And this is black, there'll be some very dark grey. I've got all these colours in this one thing here, so I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. Darning Harris Tweed is actually quite rewarding because you darn it and then you press it, and what I like is when I do it, then I have to look for where I've done it, and you might not be able to do an invisible repair, but you can do an unnoticeable repair. And like I said, this kind of Harris Tweed, it's just not going to be seen again. My first suit that I bought was Harris Tweed. It was like carpet. That was in the days when everything was from the sheep on the island. The dyes were locally produced. It was woven on little wooden hand looms. Now, they're lovely people on those islands up there, but they have to move with the times. Synthetic clothing's taken over shooting and fishing and this sort of thing. People don't wear Harris Tweed plus fours anymore. They're wearing high-tech stuff. So these old Harris Tweed jackets, particularly up to about the mid-70s, they've got to be preserved. I used to, a long time ago, they'd be thrown away. But now, even if a jacket's completely wrecked, you look at a jacket like this, and if it's completely wrecked and completely worn out, you probably still get 3 or 4 8-piece caps out of it. And you can use the lining in the cap, so you've got vintage quality lining. You can make a vintage cap. You can make several vintage caps out of one old Harris Tweed jacket that's not fit for purpose anymore. So yeah, don't throw them anyway. Don't throw them away anymore. Repair them. Raincoats. I've got about 12 raincoats. I think I probably need 12 raincoats. I'm not going to be part of many of them. I might only wear one of them. I tend to slip on an old Burberry, funnily enough. A lot of people think Burberry invented the raincoat. They didn't. They invented gabardine, which all credit to them, but the first trench coat in this style was made for soldiers in the trenches, and it had lots of little military things going on. You see, the epaulets, you have your officers' pips on the epaulets here. Now on the belt, you get little D-rings, which they still put on these days. That was for your gun and anything else you might want to hang on there. So usually there'll be a panel here on trench coats, a little D-ring here that will be for the whistle when they're going over the top. Now this is a Grenfell raincoat. This is the holy grail of raincoats. This is the best raincoat in the world, and it's a trench coat, and it's got a Melton lining in it. This was the most expensive raincoat you could buy. I'll probably never wear this. I don't like the trench coats. Awfully, a bit too fussy for me, but they're popular. What I prefer, the one I'll sort of slip on if it actually is raining, and I've got it handy, just an old Burberry one, and I sort of favour this tonic green colour. I mean, this is just no nonsense, nothing, no unnecessary stuff, just something that keeps you dry. Some of my customers sometimes put their hands in their pocket and think there's a hole or something. No, that's any decent raincoat has this facility. You do it up and it's raining, and then you get to your car and you think, oh, where's my car keys? Well, they're in my trouser pocket. That's so that you can get your inside pockets without having to undo the raincoat. This is a nice old Burberry one, when Burberry still was the real company, spelt Burberry's with an S on the end. When their main shop in London didn't say Burberry's, but Scotch House. If you see a Scotch House raincoat, that was the big Burberry shop. When they suddenly got successful in the fashion business, they changed the name to Burberry, which just sounds a bit more international and cool, and they changed the Scotch House shop into the Burberry flagship store. Lovely aqua scutum one here again, with a zip out lining. These are just fantastic. These are, again, nice and simple to wear. The zip out lining is just a nice thing to have in winter because it's as warm as an overcoat. Now, I think the film was the Ipcress file. There's a picture, I think, for the film poster with Michael Caine wearing a aqua scutum or a Burberry raincoat. But it just came about there. And they became really fashionable there. Everybody wanted them. Quite often people come into the shop and say, I've got those Michael Caine ones. They were fine until you found out when you actually went out in the rain, being a raincoat and waterproof, rain would run down the coat and absolutely soak your knees and you get a big soaked patch on your trousers like that. So a raincoat has to be past your knees, really, if it's going to be any good at all. Burberry, Burberry, Burberry. That's what I hear from all my Chinese customers as soon as they come through the door. Let me tell you a little bit about Burberry. They were always a little bit in the shadow of Aquascutum, who made the first trench coat. Their trench coats were, and their raincoats were excellent. I think Burberry actually invented gabardine, which we now call raincoats gabardines, and we call them Macs, because Macintosh was a big maker now. But what I like to see is what I consider real Burberry, which is Burberry's with an S on the end of it. So this is the old label Burberry's, but when they suddenly got really successful in the fashion business, which would normally have been a joke when a conservative company just making raincoats like Burberry starts getting into the fashion business, it's normally a joke, but the stuff they did was really, really good. They hit the moment and really successful, and they got very rich very quickly. And very sensibly, they decided they wanted to control the marketing all over the world, so they bought back their agency in Japan, I think, and bought back their agency where they'd sold the name to somebody else, so they could control the whole thing. And they changed the name. They experimented a little bit with Thomas Burberry, but then they just went with Burberry, because that sounded more international and grown up. But I had a chap, I used to supply stuff to Burberry, because nobody thinks of keeping their old patterns while they're making them. They're just glad to sell everything they've got. And then 50 years later they say, wouldn't it be nice if we had some physical examples of the old patterns? So they used to buy a lot of old raincoats from me. And a chap used to come round, I think he was a retired director, he was doing their archive, and he told me a little secret. He said, the standard label like this, if you see, they sold in a lot of shops and they'd write the name of the shop on the label. On some of the older labels, this bottom bit here is not actually sewn in, and you can lift this bit up and look underneath. There's a little secret white label which has got the order number and the size on it. And yeah, little Burberry secret. But of course they went from Burberry's to being, well, their main shop in London, I think they had somewhere in the Haymarket, but their shop in Knightsbridge wasn't even called Burberry's. It was called Scotch House. So if you see this, a Scotch House label, what you've got is actually a Burberry raincoat. And I don't know if that was because of marketing, they could sell them at different prices, I don't know, but if you compare, you can see it's exactly the same kind of label as the blue label in this jacket, and even the side label, it's the same label, but in, obviously made by the same label maker, but in a different colour, with the same details on it. I love Burberry stuff, but I do like the old stuff. Now, with fashion companies, a lot of it is absolutely flimsy old rubbish, but a girl brought a skirt into me a couple of weeks ago. She wanted another button put on it. She bought this in some sort of Black Friday sale. The new price for this skirt was £1,200, and she bought it for £600, which is still pretty expensive. But I was a little bit surprised, because I'm used to looking at flimsy old rubbish and at high prices. I looked at this skirt. The pattern match, it was a sort of tweed kilt. The pattern matching was superb, up to Lambourne standards, and the quality of the stitching, and I was really cynically trying to find something wrong with it, but it was a really super garment. So yeah, congratulations, Burberry, are still making some good kit. Now, incestuous old business, because this is a Highland jacket and it's got the Scotch House label, that's Burberry. But the waistcoat, you see the matching buttons, matching material, this is a part of a complete suit to wear with the kilt. But the waistcoat has got a Moss Bros label in it, so maybe this was sold, Scotch House manufacturers sold through Moss Bros or the other way around, but I've had Inverter products sold through Dax Simpson with these joint labels that they have, so pretty incestuous old business. I love duffel coats. There's absolutely nothing as comfortable as a duffel coat. Surprising because they can be sort of open and yet they're still warm. The pockets are in exactly the right place to just stick your hands in them, especially when you've got phones and all that sort of stuff these days. It's such an incredibly well thought out, simple garment. Originally, I think the first we saw them was for the British Navy. You'll see sort of captains and admirals on battleships wearing them with a big polo neck white submariner's jersey. But there's different makers, and for me, the only maker, if I'm going to own a duffel coat myself, and I think I've got 3, this make, Gloverall, is just head and shoulders above all the others. Now suddenly, duffel coats have become incredibly fashionable, and so people like Ralph Lauren and I think Yves Saint Laurent making duffel coats. Guarantee, if it's fashion people making them, they're going to be rubbish. They're not going to stand up. I mean, I've seen duffel coats from fashion companies like Laura Ashley and Monsoon and people, and you just wouldn't wear them on a battleship. But these Gloverall coats are absolutely fabulous, as long as they continue to make them like this. Now, they've nicked a lot of things from different people. The fabric, I think, is the reason they're called duffel coats. There's a town in Belgium that used to make the fabric. It's called Duffel. I think I'm right on that. These toggles, I think we nicked this from China. On Chinese garments, they had a sort of lozenge shape fastening that worked like this duffel coat. I don't know if it's come from anywhere else, but it's such a fantastic garment. There's a lot of adjustment in the hood. You can actually bring it down close to your scalp if you're really seriously cold. Never actually used that. See, it's got a piece of elastic in it as well. Now, there are duffel coats from other manufacturers that I've said, and there's 2 or 3 manufacturers that claim to have made the original duffel coat and tend to be the governors, but I see an awful lot, and I've worn a lot of these. Only Gloverall ones. I think this company's, I mean, I might be wrong, it might be as big as Burberry soon, because they've started making a lot of other garments. They do a wax short duffel coat, right? And I recently had through my hands a duffel coat, but in white cotton canvas. So you've got a summer duffel coat, but it's quite chic and smart. So maybe I only hope that they don't go the same way as R.M. Williams and Bell Staff and these companies that once made super workwear and incredibly durable garments. And then as soon as they become a fashion company, the accountants come in and say, oh, we can make these cheaper, you know. We can use cheaper materials. I mean, Ralph Lauren, they must have a rule where they just won't spend more than about $20 on any material they buy, because it's very photogenic stuff, but you get a tweed suit from Ralph Lauren, it's not going to last very long. Right, top hats. As a lot of people probably know, I've been making really quite beautiful waistcoats for rich people and very nice people to get married in. And of course, people don't really wear top hats at weddings anymore, although the father of the bride and the groom might. But there's no obligation for people to wear top hats at weddings. So the only people that wear them now is where you have to wear them, which is in the enclosures at Royal Ascot. Now, you can turn up at Ascot in your lovely brand new sort of Porsche or something and not get noticed at all. Turn up in a vintage Bentley and you get admiring glances. It's a bit the same with top hats. Unfortunately, the new Chinese felt hats are not all that elegant, but if you haven't got a silk hat, you're going to have to make one of the those. Now, silk hats, the last one was made, I think, in 1963. I think it was Herbert Johnson made the last one. It's a special silk velvet, and 1963 was when the velvet ran out, so I'm told. Now, it's not an ordinary velvet. It's, if you imagine velvet is like a lawn that's just been mowed, and but the silk plush is, if you imagine a lawnmower that does one long blade and one short one long one, short blade, that creates a wispy effect that you can brush around on a cardboard frame and make a nice hat out of it. So this really beautiful stuff which will never ever be made again. Now, there was one guy who supplied the whole world with this silk plush, some French chap. And I think the machine was being moved from one place to another. It got dismantled. It just never got mantled again. Now, the British government heard about this, and diplomatic hats and Royal Naval bicorn hats and things have this same silk plush on the sides. And the British government, or somebody, Home Office or whatever, said, "Okay, oh boy, what's it going to cost to get you back in business?" I think the price he gave them was like, we wouldn't get a battleship for that kind of money. So that was it. That was the end of black silk plush. It will never happen again. So we'll never see the skills that went into making this kind of hat, and we'll never see this material again. I've often thought that on one of my trips to China, I like to tackle some Chinese hat manufacturer and make a nice, lightweight, felt, elegant shaped hat with a proper leather lining headband and a proper silk thing. Now, silk is really cheap in China. I mean, it doesn't cost even £1 to put a real silk lining in. And they've got a lot of pigskin in China. They eat a lot of pork. So, you know, pigskin lining instead of a plastic one would be much nicer. This hat is supplied to Harrods, but I can tell it's made by Lock. I recognise this white sweatband inside. That's Lock signature. So when Locks used to make hats, I think this was one of theirs. These sell on size. If you've got a big head, you might be in a long queue waiting for a size 7.5, and you might have to pay thousands for it. If you've got a very tiny head, you might pick up one for a couple of £100. This one is about my size. It's a 7 1/8, but it's not the right shape. See, that's the problem with top hats. Not just getting the right circumference, it's got to be your head shape as well. There was a thing called a conformator for people that did bespoke hats, made-to-measure hats. I'm going to go into that later because it was quite fraudulent. But yeah, this hat sort of fits me, but rocks from side to side because it's a bit too wide and not quite long enough for my long head. So I can put it on, but it's a bit contrived to get a nice fit. They get dusty if you keep them out of the box. And what you give them white with is not as any kind of stiff brush, and never get any water on them. But quite often you were supplied like a little velvet pincushion, and you use that to wipe counterclockwise around the hat. I'm going to use the sleeve of this old, already slightly damaged velvet jacket, and just a soft velvet rag like that will take all the dust out of it and leave it nice and combed in the right direction. You might even see the dust coming out of there. It looks like smoke coming out. And again, counterclockwise around the hand, and you put a nice shine on it like that, and in the top, so get all that dust off the top there, and that looks a little bit better. Now, top hats can sort of lose their blackness, especially the felt band around there. There's a product that's made for sort of toning up black suede shoes. Very high viscosity. Does say on the can, cannot harm any fabrics. And if you give your hats, it also works on felt bowler hats. If they're a little bit grey, give them a spray with that, let them dry off, and it really makes them look 10 times as good. I'll show on another video. I'll show people how to do that. When you get these old hats, they've frequently got initials actually stitched onto the band on the inside, or just stuck in like that. Hats look pretty similar, so when you go to the cloakroom, you want to make sure you get your own hat back, and so people would put their initials in. bloody brilliant. If you're a manufacturer, you make a suit, you've got like half a metre left. You can get maybe 3 caps out of that, certainly get 2, depending which one. The 8-piece cap, which Peaky Blinders has made incredibly popular, that's used out of tiny scraps. Now, the history of caps, this is the brilliant thing about them. In Victorian times, you had companies that did caps and schoolboy trousers, and that was a popular thing. Small garments that you could make from scraps purchased by the sackload, purchased by weight, from bigger manufacturers that made coats and overcoats and what have you. Now, the outer fabric they get from suit and coat makers, the lining from suit and coat makers. This stuff here, it's called Petersham, they got from corset makers. Everybody wore corsets in Victorian times, and so you could buy this stuff as scraps. Now, inside this cap, if it's made properly, there's an internal lining which is a piece of hessian. It was very breathable. And of course, everything was delivered in sacks in Victorian times, from coal to vegetables and everything else. So all these things, the hessian, the outer, the inner, this Petersham, all available as scraps from manufacturers. But now, if you buy a modern cap, you can't do this with it, because there's a big lump of plastic in the peak. Even the expensive ones you buy in these plastic peaks, and they're not really all that comfortable. What those clever Victorians did, everything was made out of leather. There are saddlers everywhere. There's a crescent-shaped piece of saddle leather in there, boot leather in there, which they'd get from boot and saddle manufacturers. And so when you put this on your head, if it's made properly, this flexes to the shape of your head. It's not a rigid lump of plastic inside there. And so you can truthfully claim, if you make a cap like mine, that they're completely renewable recycling materials. This lining in this particular one is actually some Chanel ball gown silk. I bought some surplus silk from some people and it said Chanel on it, so I presume this silk was going to be made for a ball gown or something. So I get rid of all these little bits of corduroy left over from trousers. This lining here, this is silk, but in all my suits I use a cotton twill lining, same as the military tailors. But yeah, the caps are absolutely brilliant for getting rid of all the old rubbish that you have in the factory. Also skirts, but I'll go into skirts later.